to address climate change and forest health in southern New England oak forests. Christopher Riely and Amanda Bunce. Quick background, Christopher Riely is a forestry specialist and research associate with the University of Rhode Island. He is the lead for the Southern New England Exurban Oak ASCC project, replicate site, and associated outreach activities in Rhode Island. He also works in partnership with Rhode Island NRCS and serves as co-coordinator of the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership. Christopher is a certified forester and active on the Yankee SAF Executive Committee. In addition, he continues to work on independent projects through his Sweet Birch consulting practice. Amanda Bunce is a graduate research assistant in natural resources and extension forestry with the University of Connecticut, where she manages the first SNE Exurban Oak ASCC site and a third replicate site, and engages in a variety of outreach for forestry professionals, landowners, or the tree-loving public. Her research work focuses on the ecological outcomes of climate-adaptive forestry, as well as the social aspects of doing forestry in the region. Amanda is a certified forester consulting in Connecticut, is the Connecticut correspondent for the NESAF newsletter. Please welcome Christopher and Amanda. Thank you.
So we'll be moving down to the southern part of the region for this talk, continuing on the climate change theme with adaptive silviculture to address that in forest health issues as well. I think by now, many of you are familiar with the adaptive silviculture for climate change or ASK project and the different management pathways, but I'll provide a quick refresher and overview of that. And really drill down on the Southern New England Exurban Oak affiliate project, and look at the Hillsdale replicate site in Rhode Island in particular, which has some unique conditions. Talk about some of the challenges and also opportunities associated with that site, and then I'm going to turn it over to Amanda, who's going to talk about diversity indices and using some of the early data that we're getting from the project and some of the applications to forest health. So, as many of you know, the Adaptive Silviculture for Climate Change project is a network of sites. It's across the United States, now a couple of sites in Canada, from here in the Northeast to sites from the Sand Plains of Georgia to the Rocky Mountains and upper Northwest. A lot of the sites are in large landscape locations like national forests, where you might have treatments implemented across 40 or 50 acres. And the Southern New England site is one of just a couple that are different in that we have several smaller replicate sites. This is a joint project between the University of Rhode Island, University of Connecticut, and the state agencies, Connecticut DEEP and the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management. Here you can see the three sites, all in public land, the Yukon Forest, Mohegan State Forest, the DEEP manages, and then Rhode Island DEM's Hillsdale Preserve in southern Rhode Island. And now there's a growing body of research on adaptive silviculture, and there's a community of practice that's developed. Many of the members are here at the meeting, and there are three overall approaches that have been codified now, which can be applied in specific ways to different locations and ecosystems, wherever you happen to be. There's the going from left to right. There's the overall resistance approach, where you're trying to hold the line on climate change as much as possible, maintain current conditions for as long as you can. This might be appropriate in a forest stand that's, relatively healthy and doing well. Then there's the resilience approach. This is, widely applicable in southern New England where we are. This is like the proverbial, rubber band, where you want to be able to bend but not break and accommodate some amount of change from the inevitable weather disturbances, insect outbreaks, and such events that are going to happen, but still head towards a desired future reference condition. And then finally, the transition approach. This is, probably best suited to a minority of sites that are really stressed, and maybe it's already apparent or will become clear that you're not going to be able to, hold on to historic conditions there. So this is managers, people, stepping in and trying to promote change or assemblages of species that may thrive or do better there in the generally hotter, drier, sometimes wetter conditions that we're anticipating or already seeing. So now just to focus in on the Southern New England project sites, this is really adapted to the small scale landscape of Southern New England, where we have a lot of smaller land holdings, 20, 40 acres, majority of private forests, or even smaller, a bit of mosaic of public and private ownership. In addition to the on-the-ground silviculture, there's also a social science research of a part of the project that started up particularly at UConn. And by having these smaller replicate sites with treatments that are implemented on smaller acreages, in addition to being a research site, it's also a demonstration, and we want this to be relatable and relevant to landowners who might consider implementing this on their own properties. So this is a replicate at Rhode Island DEM's Hillsdale Preserve. This is one of their newer state forests. The reason the site's located there is the DEM sees this as their research and experimental project site for forestry and upland habitat projects. And you can see how the different treatment areas are laid out around each other. So only 7 to 10 acres each. The red dots are a network of hopefully what are going to be long-term, monitoring plots that are scattered throughout the different treatments. This is generally a dry, rocky soils with a gentle, slope that's, as you move southward in the site. And we tried to lay out the different treatments to match the site conditions that we found there in the different areas. So this is what it looks like on the ground. So pretty typical Southern New England woods. You have the, oak dominated canopy with some hickory in there, a lot of black birch, red maple in the understory. You can see the stone wall in the foreground. This is land that's been inhabited for thousands of years. Significant agricultural disturbance and land use in the 19th century. If you come out here 100 plus years ago, you might have seen sheep at this site. Also, some parts of the site are experiencing very significant forest health issues. This is really the epicenter of the spongy moth infestation in Rhode Island in the late 2010s. This is precipitated by several years of drought, followed by defoliations and successive seasons, leading to heavy canopy mortality. In the picture you can see here, where I'm working with Tom Worthley of UConn and doing the initial site inventory. And not only that, but in some areas of the site, there's pretty heavy greenbrier in the understory. That's actually a native species, but it has invasive tendencies and is another challenge for management. So the mortality is really evident when you get up above the site. This is a photo from a drone looking over the canopy, and you can see the extent of the mortality. Most of the canopy oaks were dead at the site before we even got out there to start this project. So when you see that, maybe you won't be shocked by this stand stocking diagram, but just shows what the spongy moth really did to the site. Essentially cutting the stand stocking in half in many of the treatment areas, even dropping it right off the stocking chart in a couple of cases. We did work on adapting the versions of the prescription that are being used at the 3 replicate sites to Hillsdale. Working getting input from foresters, wildlife biologists, others in the region, and the initial treatment implementation harvest has been conducted over the past few months, just wrapping up now. It was done by a contractor, mostly working on his own, sometimes with one assistant. You can see different parts of the operation here. And it's going to walk through the different treatments. But in the resistance area, this was, earmarked for the more, relatively, mesic, part of the site. So there was somewhat less mortality here than in other areas. On some of the other sites, there's say they're, trying to promote the, continued dominance of oak hickory in the canopy. Here, we're really trying to promote its return because of the damage that the canopy suffered. There's also some tulip poplar growing here because of the more productive soil conditions. And the plan is to gradually try to, regenerate, these species using the shelter wood method. That's the traditional way of doing so down in our region. There's, some reserves, including, one along an intermittent stream. The wildlife biologist suggested creating a gap for habitat for, small mammals and migratory songbirds adjacent to a wetland that was used for some of us foresters are used to wanting to stay away from the wetlands. And generally, we try to retain more standing dead wood and corpse woody debris in here than in the other treatment areas. So you can see the before and after pictures as much as the job has been completed to this point. Now, just moving sort of up a hill to behind the resistance treatment is the resilience treatment, which is somewhat similar, but creating larger gaps to still try to favor oak and hickory, but promoting more overall diversity here. Cutting some of those small diameter, black birches and red maples that you can see there. These are often, centered on areas where there was some natural mortality. And trying to, to work around the greenbrier that is, particularly, found in this treatment area. And we're going to be doing some planting here. Maybe consider other species or other genuses in the future. But for now, we're going to focus on oaks and, planting species that are, well adapted to the sort of dry and rocky soil conditions. So black, scarlet, and white oak are already, found in the stand here. And we also think that chestnut oak would do quite well here, given its characteristics. Then moving on to the transition area, this is where we're really trying to promote future adapted species in a multi-age structure. This is also the most heavily impacted part of the site from a forest health perspective. So, we're, creating the largest gaps of all here. And Mother Nature helped us in choosing where the gap locations were going to be. We really didn't need to create any new ones. It was just, further opening up some areas like what you see there in the photo. And here we're going to be planting some oaks that aren't found in Rhode Island yet, but think, may see solid growing conditions now or in the future. And, some challenges in, finding some of the oaks that we wanted to plant. I really thought that post oak could do quite well here, but couldn't source that from a nursery for 2024. Blackjack oak was another under consideration, but we're going to be going with Burr, Chinkapin, Shumard, and Southern Red Oak. I'm particularly excited about Chinkapin and Southern Red and their performance potential at the site. And the tree planting slated for later this spring. And generally, we're aiming for fewer standing dead trees, less coarse woody debris in this treatment area. And then finally, I don't want to overlook the important control. This was chosen because it contained a mix of the site conditions that were found in the other areas, from pockets that were pretty healthy to areas with a lot of mortality. So it's going to be passively managed, essentially left alone, but have the same monitoring as the other three areas, so it can serve as that reference or comparison for the other treatment areas. So in addition to the quite intensive monitoring plots, you can do 2 or 3 of them in a day if you work hard. We did think it would be valuable to do traditional inventory pre and post harvest. And here are the results we have. I'm sure that the overall low basal area is something that will stand out to you guys, and the the high percentage of dead trees or coarse woody debris even after the implementation harvest. But do want to point out that moving from the resistance, to the transition area, you have you're going from a higher to lower basal area there. This is reflective of the conditions that we're starting with and the percentage of, live trees in each of the treatment areas, is increased, even as though it's not, quite as much as we might have liked to have seen in some areas in implementing the prescription. Did see some, challenges in, implementing this harvest. And, I think this, follows up on some of the elements that, Sam touched on in his talk, though less directly weather related. We need to work within the constraints of the government agency's contracting process. The harvest was delayed for the better part of a year because of some elements associated with that. That actually enabled us to get 2 years of pre-harvest monitoring data, which and there were some differences from between the 2 years that you'll see, which were interesting. Became apparent pretty early on this site. This was not going to be an income generating project for the marginal site that it is. In fact, we needed to add some work on a small number of additional acres on this forest not far away, to make it economically viable, to get the one positive, bid that the state, needed to be able to move forward with it. It was tricky, trying to adapt, some of these prescriptions that we really had somewhat more, MESAF conditions in mind that exist, over at the Connecticut replicate sites, and to get them to, fit the conditions that we have at Hillsdale. Though I think we're going to learn a lot, and there's value in doing so. And there's also some, tension in between the sort of standard harvesting practices in, the research standards. I think this photo here of the expensive, feller buncher costs a lot to run. You can see it here, cutting these, extremely, low value red maples or black birches here, and trying to make it work economically. There are a few more trees out there that I think we may need to fell ourselves. But I do think that we are making lemonade out of lemons, because there are a lot of landowners who are, facing mortality levels like this in our region, particularly along the Connecticut, Rhode Island border, where the spongy moth damage was most intensive, going on up into central Massachusetts. Goodness knows, invasive issues seem to be almost everywhere now. So I think that this replicate site will be particularly useful for informing management on other heavily impacted sites. We did, have had significant interest and support from groups and individuals who aren't the ones who are, members of the Forest Landowner Association or part of the tree farm program. This project actually ended up in an article. It was a surprise to us, but they put it on the front page of the Providence Sunday Journal back in January. It was a positive article, and I think that people are hungry for positive stories related to climate change. And I think there's also a big potential role for cost share programs like NRCS, some state programs or others we're hearing about at this conference to help make this silviculture possible, given some of the challenges in doing so. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda, who's going to talk about diversity indices from some of the early results.
What's the button? Oh, here. Okay. All right, thank you. I'm Amanda. So Christopher runs the site in Rhode Island. I run the one in Mohegan State Forest in Connecticut, which we started with, and we're implementing a third one in Lee Farm, which is a tract of Yukon forest in Connecticut too. Anyway, I just wanted to talk about diversity. Diversity is an important part of not just our prescriptions that we came up with for these projects, but it's an important part of all climate adaptive silviculture prescriptions. I might say it's a part of all prescriptions for forests that we want to remain forests, perhaps. But it's especially important for climate adaptive silviculture because it's a way of us sort of hedging our bets. Tom Worthley often talks about keeping all of the students on the bus. So we want all of our species, all of our structures, all of our everything on the bus. We want everything in the forest to work with in the case of disturbances happening or everything else, so that the forest has a lot to choose from for recovery purposes. So diversity is super important. Because we don't know what's coming. So this is how we hedge our bets going forward. We talk about diversity of both species and structure. So you want a lot of different tree species on your property, your parcel. You also want a variety of structures. That's not just for getting the diversity of a habitat available, which is wildly important, but also it gives you a variety of things that may or may not be resistant to any kind of disturbance. Wind disturbances, for example, tend to destroy one sort of version of a structure, like really tall, mature trees in a forest will all go down to a certain wind condition. And then you're left with your other ones that you had also growing. But if everything is the same, then everything goes down to one disturbance. So yeah, diversity of species and structure. So this is just a picture of some canopy mortality. That picture on the right, you can see one dead tree amongst that canopy there. We had quite a spread of canopy mortality in our 3 sites. Lee Farm doesn't have that much. This picture is from Mohegan, which had quite a bit of canopy mortality. And then Hillsdale, which Christopher showed a lot of pictures of, was the worst. It got you saw those dots dropping right off the stocking chart. And then on the left side is some anthracnose. That's in a site nearby our Lee Farm site that so we had a lot of anthracnose on maple in the fall last year, which was an exciting new way of disturbing our forests. So again, we want variety in our forests. So when something gets hit by something new, which is constantly happening with climate change, we have lots of other options out there to choose from. So to develop a species diversity index, our way of studying diversity, measuring it to see whether or not we're doing a good job, whether or not we're improving it, which, is the goal. We created a diversity index for species based on a calculation called a Shannon diversity index. So we took all of our species of trees that we have on all the sites. This is just the layout. It's a rough layout, rough proportions of all 3 sites lumped together. Christopher mentioned there was some tulip poplar on the Hillsdale site. That's up in the other category there. But yeah, a lot of oak, a little bit of hickory, a lot of different maples and black birch were all the understory. So in addition to diversity, another objective we had for all these sites was to regrow that oak. Oak doesn't really happen unless you manage for it. These sites will all turn over to maple birch if we don't manage for oak. So managing for oak was definitely part of the objectives for these sites. Anyway, the diversity index is a calculation made of the proportion of each of these different species within the whole group of trees available on the sites. So that is how we made a species diversity index. It's not like a measurement like a mile or a foot or something. It's just a number useful for comparing to other numbers. So we're going to use this index and we're going to measure it the same way or calculate it the same way for every site so we can compare them amongst each other. Structural diversity index was a little trickier. People measure structural diversity in lots of different ways. One of my lab's favorite ones is rugosity. Bob Fahey at UConn is my advisor, and he loves shooting lasers at trees. And they get really nice maps of 3D maps of the forest. And you can kind of calculate the surface area of the canopy of trees. And that is what we call rugosity, is the more surface area per land area, the more varied your structures are. So if you have like a young forest or a really old forest that's all the same, you have a very sort of low surface area per square, whatever. But if you have a varied structure, you get more surface area. Another way to calculate structure is spatial arrangement of stems and clustering of stems. If any of you are familiar with Jess Weichel's work on the Ask site in northern New England, she uses that in her most recent paper, I believe, the spatial arrangement of stems. to sort of give you an idea of what the structural diversity in an area is. We calculated structural diversity in the simplest way anyone does it. We took our DBHs for our trees and divided them up into classes. So we have categories of 4-inch DBH classes. And those were our categories. We used them just like the species, and we determined the proportion of each of those classes of DBH and calculated a Shannon index in the same way. So this way, our structural diversity and our species diversity are comparable to one another, and we can calculate them the same way for all the sites. And here is all of the sites. So we have in the colors are our 3 different sites. It's Hillsdale, the Rhode Island one, is in red. Lee Farm, which is our newest Yukon site, is in the blue, and Mohegan is the dark one. So you can see that these are all okay. Y-axis is the structural diversity index, and the x-axis is the species diversity index. So we plot a site on that plot, and the upper right corner is more diverse and the lower left is less diverse. So what you can see there is the 2 red dots down towards the lower left. Those are Hillsdale's resilience and transition sites. And this is all data from before we did anything. And we had already identified those sites as the most impacted by the spongy moth drought combination. And those were the sites that needed the most help. So we were going to make the most impact, or when we did our treatments, on those sites. So that's our our resilience and our transition sites. So we were going to get a lot of work done in there. That's where the planting that Christopher was talking about is going to happen. You can see the triangles are the resistance sites. For all 3 sites, we picked our resistance areas in areas that were already fairly diverse. We weren't going to make a lot of impact with the resistance treatments. We try to sort of keep the species mix the same, and we want to keep full canopy cover in those resistance areas. So that, as in the very gradual shelter wood that Christopher was describing, that we're going to do in those sites. So those were already pretty diverse sites, and as you can see, this metric pans out. We picked the right ones. This is Hillsdale. Christopher mentioned we were lucky enough to get 2 years of pre-treatment data on Hillsdale. And you can see the triangles, the resistance sites, and the squares are the controls. Those are in the upper right. We picked the fairly diverse areas for those, and they didn't change much over the 2 years. The other 2, the resilience and the transition ones, where we were going to make the most impact, so we wanted them to be the more messed up ones anyway. You can see they actually changed a lot over the last 2 years, and that's evidence of sort of this ongoing impact from that spongy moth drought situation. So trees that were maybe still alive have died. Trees that were standing are now on the ground. So that is an ongoing impact. And the spongy moth population has certainly come down, but it's still, but the trees are still feeling it. The forest ecosystem is still feeling that issue. So this is Mohegan before and after. It's the one site that we have finished. That's not true. Hillsdale is now officially finished the treatment, but we haven't gotten back into calculating it yet. Mohegan, we finished the treatment last winter-ish, and we ran the numbers. And you can see that the resilience treatment, the circles, and the transition treatments changed a lot. So they did come down in diversity, which is interesting. They all sort of moved to the left and down, especially the resilience one came down in diversity. So that's like unfortunate. Ideally, we want our sites to go up in diversity, but it is important to note that those were the most messed with sites to begin with. They were the most damaged. We did the most work in those sites, and what you're seeing is sort of the outcome of just the canopy, to be clear. So you're seeing a mix of starting conditions plus what we did to it. And these are just the canopy numbers. So it looks like it's less diverse now, but we set it up to increase diversity to above where it started at in the future. So we got to keep monitoring these sites. As you all know, forestry stuff takes forever. What else was I going to say about these? Yeah. Oh, another thing is this is just canopy data. So one of our future goals is to also calculate the diversity in the understory and the difference between the canopy and understory species. So we're going to see if we set it up to sort of roll over to new new cohorts of species and structures in the future. This is Mohegan before and after. This picture in the bottom right is we did a tour with the commissioner of Connecticut Deep. So we use these sites for demonstration sites. We're telling people what we're doing, and we're doing everything we can to sort of show off how we're doing it. And in the future, hopefully it'll pan out. Whoop, I missed one. There we go. Yeah. The last thing I wanted to point out was that the resistance one didn't change too much. The control one appears to have changed a lot. That's my science problem. That happened when I cleaned up some data and got rid of some measured trees that shouldn't have been in there. And now it looks like my control sites changed a lot. And I think that might be due to the fact that I didn't train my undergrad interns well enough to measure trees out there. So we're working on that. I got to dive back into that data and see what happened. I highly doubt the structure of the control site changed too much. But yeah, so that's where we're at. And if we have a second, I'll take questions. Okay.
Maybe one or two quick ones, please.
Sure,
Okay.
sir.
Look at carbon.
From my understanding, or live and dead standing.
Yeah, I haven't exactly, but we're yeah, we haven't run the calculations yet, but we have collected every data we think is possible to be needed to make those calculations. So we've got all the live and all the dead clocked and measured and in the spreadsheets. So yeah, the carbon is going to be something we absolutely have to calculate on these sites. But it is important to note that carbon came up when we were sort of co-developing the prescriptions to this, but it's not an objective on this site. For this site, we need it to recover from that spongy moth drought incident. So we know there'll be carbon there in the future at all. But increasing the carbon specifically is not an objective of these things, but we will calculate it for sure. Does that answer your question?
If you think creatively in terms of how do we recover these sites, not just in terms of the ecological recovery, but also carbon recovery, just because we've got this 30-year window that's a problem.
Do you want me to talk about the carbon markets and mills not taking our dead oak trees after the spongy moth incidents? Okay.
We're gonna leave it there for now. Hopefully you guys will, Amanda and Christopher both be available. Thank you. Thank you. Excellent.